So now we are going to move on to the continent of Africa with two speakers from the Pan-African Design Institute sharing their take on leadership and creative confidence. I am pleased to introduce Juliet Kavishe and Sam Adjaidoo. Juliet holds a master's in interior architecture and is practicing professional interior architect design educator and alumna of University of Pretoria, South Africa. Over the course of a career spanning 15 years and 2 continents, she has also worked as an interior architect and architectural designer on projects with a focus on high-end residential homes and commercial and corporate workspaces globally. Juliet has been appointed as executive board member and editor-in-chief of PADI, that's the Pan-African Design Institute, Educational Journal Committee, where they are striving to create a design journal specifically for design professionals and academics with a focus on African design and African-focused design education. And Sam is a design, marketing and communications consultant. Sam works with local and multinational companies to develop design strategies and business development solutions with design. Sam educates, inspires, and leads teams across industries to transform organizations through human-centered innovations and design leadership. Sam is an advocate of change by design. His vision is to see the African and the youth of this global economy become highly confident in exhibiting and causing change through creative intelligence. His interest in education, health, social change, and community development led him to establish a design school, the Institute of Design and Synergistics. Welcome, Juliet and Sam.
Hi, thank you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. All right, so I think that we'll take it from here and then we'll do our presentation. So what we want to talk about today is about leadership and creative confidence. We believe that leadership ought to bring up vision to the world. So it's leadership that creates vision, but every vision ought to be executed. And we're looking at how driving change and policy can be done by design. So that is what we want to talk about today.
So thank you for that introduction, Sam. So we'd like to start with the question, do we need leaders or do we need creative confidence? One of the panelists earlier spoke about how creative confidence is core to leadership. So Sam, what are your thoughts on this? I know we've spoken about this often, but what are your thoughts?
All right, so I think that the world is in a state where we need people that are not afraid. We are looking for people that would want to go beyond what is visible, what is readily available for them. The world is actually in a complex state where we are looking for people that can go beyond what is at stake, people that will be able to move beyond the challenges that we face today globally. And therefore, if we're talking about leadership, we then have to look at the construct called creative confidence, in the sense that anyone that is creatively confident seeks to do more than what is required. The person is not afraid of the unknown. The person seeks to take risk, calculated risk. The person also looks at how to collaboratively work with others and also not be shying away from criticisms that come from the outside of their domain. So the first thing that I think is critical that we should look at when we're looking for leaders is to look at those that are not afraid, those that are willing to go into the dark and bring the lights that we're looking for, those that are willing to go into the dark and bring the answers that we're looking for. So because it is the answers that are going to lead us, it's the executions of the answers that are going to lead this global economy. So if we're looking for leaders, then we're looking for people that are not afraid to face the unknown and are not afraid to take the risk that they are supposed to take for us. So instead of we trying to say we need leaders, yes, we need leaders, but we should look at, are these leaders creatively confident? Are they creatively confident? So my question to you, Juliet, if you want to expand on what I said, is if you were not afraid, if all of us were not afraid to face the unknown and take the first step, what would you do, Juliet?
I think this then becomes one of those not only personal but contextual questions, especially on the African continent. We have been riddled with aspects that were beyond our control in terms of colonization, apartheid in South Africa, where there is a rid of our own African identity, a stripping back or a dehumanization of what that African identity is. And then now there's this resurgence in gaining that pride in identity and that pride in our inherent creativity. So the concept of not being afraid is layered with years of conditioning. So to answer you directly, if I was not afraid to face the unknown, the first direct step would be to hit the ground running in terms of grassroots approaches. So what are the current contextual issues that we have on the African continent? Can these then be solved with specific design solutions? What are these design solutions? And then take those problems or those challenges within the design, go through the design thinking process and see if we can, solve them, and then approach our various governments or policy and decision makers. And this then brings us back to this slide. Where are the creatively confident? The creatively confident are like you and me and those who are sitting on this panel today, those who are listening in. We all sit in these silos and we assume that we do not have the power or the say-so or the access to these avenues where we can change policy. Because we're sitting far away from the decision-making table, how do we approach the decision-making table? Various governments have avenues where you can apply for funding, apply for an audience, have talks like these and invite pertinent people to listen in. We are the creatively confident. We need to have more discussions, more public platforms, more local platforms, localized platforms, and get those on the grassroots to speak up about the challenges in order for us to effect change. Yes, so this is exactly that. The policy decision-making table is not in that cozy office, it's on the streets. So as designers, we are hitting the ground running. And this is something that is imperative to how we get things done on the African continent, how we get things done in our local sectors. So Sam, again, the same question to you, with regards to policy making and decision making, especially in West Africa. What are your thoughts and ideas around the approach? Is it grassroots up? Is it top down, from the bottom up?
I think that design actually is in the position of leadership, because every single thing that is going on globally, and when we bring it down to Africa contextually, you realize that Africans are actually attached to their cultural values. And if you get to see the cultural aspect of Africans, we are attached to our artifacts, we are attached to some of our cultural festivities. And these are some of the design solutions that have come up to drive this continent. Now, the point is that if we're looking at coming up with policies for leadership, because policies are supposed to be providing solutions for the average person. So if we're looking at policies, where do we get these policies? You know for sure that we have leadership in our parts of the world. There's government leadership, there is community leadership. We also have in our industry various leaders. Now, the question is, if we're looking for the creatively confident people, where do we go to? Do we only go to the office to say these are the creatively confident people, or we go to the streets? Because day in, day out, these people are facing challenges. You made mention of the history of what we've been going through as Africans. These people have been thriving. They make decisions by fighting against their fears. They are able to survive on the daily basis by entering certain areas that is unknown to them. Today, the South African person doesn't know what is going to happen tomorrow. Again, Ghanaians don't even know how much the fuel is going to be, or if the next goods that we're going to receive ought to come from China or from my local gift shop. So the question is, where do we solicit ideas, solutions, if we want to bring creative confidence to the policy-making table? We have to look at the people.
Yeah.
We have to realize that these people that we are trying to solve their problems by congregating around the table to decide for them, if we're going to engage leaders, government leaders, organizational leaders, if we want to be engaging these people, designers have to realize that human beings are complex. And if we would want to solve their problems, they would have to be encouraged to see themselves as creatively confident people. That is the reason why when we are doing anything across our industry, what the client is looking for is paramount. It's imperative for us to gather insights from these people, because when we collaboratively solve problems, when we don't send down the problem to the average person, but we collaboratively work with the street people, then we seem to create a culture where people's creative confidence are being boosted. So whoever is invited to the table is not afraid to take some initiatives. Whoever is invited to the table, whether you are coming from anywhere, because the definition of creative confidence by David Keller is that everybody is creative. If everybody is creative, then it means that the person we're trying to solve problems for, the person that we have gathered to take decisions concerning, ought to be encouraged to be creative. The way to do that is to invite them to the table. So if we want to make decisions at a table, we have to look at the people first. Why? Because at a table, whereas maybe somebody that is not creatively confident is saying that this is how a tree ought to be, the guy sitting by a gutter somewhere will say, no. Can we grow a tree with leaves as the roots? That is a different thing altogether. So how do we marry? How do we merge these ideas at the policy-making table? It is when we invite, it is when we try to bring people that have this kind of skill, because at the decision-making table, it is also advised from design perspective to have inclusivity. We have to bring people together. We have to make decision-making done in diverse manners. So it means we have to gather a lot of diversity in order to make decisions. Bringing all these things then will boost the creative confidence at the table. So,
sorry, Sam, to interrupt you there. So back to that, which I want to pose a question here. You mentioned diversity and inclusivity. Yeah. And I think one of the aspects that happens quite a lot in the continent, and what we're striving to do as PADI, is have collaborations across the design spectrum and across the design professions.
Mm.
And have you found that in your experience that these collaborations then lead to richer solutions, for example, and a different approach to solving problems based on this graphic that you have in front about, what is a tree, what are roots, what are leaves, fundamentally, can these roles be interchangeable? What are your thoughts around that?
All right, so I think that one of the key things that we have to look for is how do we amass power? How do we amass power? How do we amass power? Now, amassing power in the sense that, sorry for that, amassing power in the sense that when I am making a decision alone, when I am making a step alone, there is fear.
Okay.
There is fear. But when I know that I'm entering this darkness with a lot of people, I know there is light with me, and that gives me power. So the question that you're trying to say is that, are we boosting our creative confidence by collaborating? Yes, of course, because what I lack, somebody in Namibia could provide. What someone in my local village lacks, another village has the solution. So the whole creative confidence aspect is to help every single person to develop their confidence for creativity, such that when all of us come together, what one person will not be able to do because of their lack of because of their lack of confidence, another person would provide that confidence. That creates inspiration. So I am inspired by your victory over fear. Because
Okay.
I see you conquer that fear with the solution you have brought. You also are inspired by some of the things that I'm doing, that given the opportunity, you may not take that action because you are afraid. Now, my presence, joining my hands with you, gives you that power. Now, that power is to take the step with me, because now you know somebody is with you to accomplish the solution that you want to solve.
Thank you, Sam.
I hope you get that. Now,
Yes.
Looking at all of these things, I want us to look at this. We know, as we are speaking today, in the industrial design field, decisions are being made. In the governmental policy-making systems, decisions are being made. So as we are speaking, a decision is being made at the policy-making table. The question is, what do you think that ought to drive policy from your perspective in Africa?
Thank you for that question, Sam. So there's several things, and it was lovely listening to some of the panelists today, because this being the talk about leadership has been kind of like this through line today, and a lot of panelists mentioned a couple of things that I'd like to bring up. So you mentioned earlier humans. We as designers design for human occupation, human use, comfort, safety, and the idea of designing for the human being, including their complexities, culture, ritual, context, becomes imperative. Another aspect that we need to consider is design education. One of the panelists earlier mentioned that how this is not only imperative, but the approach in which we teach or tutor, rather, design becomes imperative in establishing that creative confidence. So when we tutor design, when we teach design, what values are we instilling in our students? What values and ethics and methodologies are we instilling in the design thinking process that our future leaders, who are our students, are going to use in the workforce out there? So humans drive policy, education drives policy. And then another aspect is community. So it's sitting in these silos of the human being, the education of the African child, and pushing design education of the African child. Also putting forward the idea of community. Inherently as Africans, we are community driven. We don't work in silos, we work as a collective to support our communities. How do we do that? And in looking at what comes best for our communities, what are these elements that drive our communities, you will find that driving policy, change in policy that is positive, that has a positive change in our communities will then trickle down to the individuals. There's a statement here that says design must leave her comfort zones and create a voice at the decision-making table. Our comfort zones are that silo space, breaking out of that silo space, speaking up to the injustices that we see in our communities, but not only speaking up, not only complaining, but offering solutions. So when you propose, when you expose or highlight a challenge, are you presenting a design solution? Are you presenting any solution at that? And the one thing that is great about the design thinking and strategy process is that within those processes, that this idea of conceptualization, iteration, and over iteration until we come up with a solution that is positive for our communities is inherent in us designers. As designers, we do that every day with every task. And if we are comfortable with dealing with this every day, there is nothing that will stop us from effective change on the policy level. So humans, education, community are at the forefront of what I think must drive design policy, what must drive any governmental policy that goes forward. On the African continent, Kenya is a great example and case study because the Kenyan government has started to hire designers at a governmental level to help them, look at the policies that govern the country. And we've seen the Kenyan economy accelerate over the years. And I think that's a great case study of how design can improve the lives of the country, but not only affect change at a governmental level and have a trickle-down effect on the citizens of that country. Yeah.
All right. I think when you were talking about what should drive, one of the key things that you spoke about was education, and that triggered something. You look at it from the perspective of the history of the human race, from the Stone Age up to where we are now in the IT world. You realize that what we seek to do is to do things to help us survive. So we produce things in order for us to survive. And therefore, our education ought to then speak to how we are trained to produce things. And if we're going to educate people, if we're going to drive policy with a certain tool, then I think creative confidence is needed, because the confidence to be able to produce, I think, is something that individually, not just in Africa, but globally, ought to be encouraged. It ought to be part of policy making. Policy ought not to only be about transforming the minds of people or trying to solve something for a group of people. Policy ought to empower the people to be able to produce for themselves. The reason is that having that opportunity to produce for yourself encourages you to contribute to the community. Why? If I have the confidence to solve a problem that I was facing because I was able to produce something for myself, then I know that when I see a problem in my community, I will have the confidence to call upon people so we can solve the problem. Now, if design education policy is going to contribute to the socioeconomic development of our continent, every single decision that we are supposed to be making ought to factor into the place empowering people to be creative. So creative confidence then becomes a necessary tool in our survival as humans.
Yeah.
So if we would want to look at the tools that ought to drive policy, the question is, what do we need in order to survive? What we need in order to survive is to have the hope that we can live to the next morning. The reason why we are able to be happy and talk today is that we've been able to overcome COVID. Now COVID is behind us, even though there are solutions coming up. We are able to have this conversation because lockdowns are off, and now globally we are interacting again. It means that we've gained a certain power to overcome the next challenge that is going to face us. And I think that you could see the quantum of creativity when COVID came. Not just at the policy-making level, but at the grassroots, because we wanted to survive.
Yeah.
So in contributing to this, if creative confidence is not part of that which is driving policy, the question is, what do you think should be leading? And if our leaders are leading without this creative confidence, from your perspective, based on what you think ought to drive policy, what do you think should lead policy?
So exactly, human, it should be human driven. But the one thing that you've mentioned, Sam, that I think is imperative is localization, and the pride in localization, the pride in, our culture, our ritual, our artifacts. And yes, it's human driven, it's education driven, it's community driven. But if we have the tools to grow our own food, if we have the tools to grow our own cotton, have mills to create our own textiles, screen printing and dyeing factories to, again, create our own, textiles, produce our own food, produce our own tea, coffee, sugar, grow sugarcane. These are localized solutions that can help aid policy. So then what happens when it comes to the export policies, to the import policies of a country? Are they globally driven? Are they locally driven? Can the person who has a farm in their backyard contribute to the country's economy by, providing produce for local supermarkets as opposed to importing? So again, there's an empowerment that happens at the local level, where these policies are put in place to empower the locals. Then the idea of globalization then does not become foreign. It doesn't become far-reaching. Locally, you've achieved certain goals, and the expansion can only be global, be it to your neighboring countries or to different continents. But to add to that, in that empowerment, you're empowering the human through education to help aid community-driven success.
So I think that this is what Juliet is trying to say. Maybe I have to leave it for you to say. I mean, so
yes.
all the things we're trying to say is that creative confidence would have to lead. We need to empower people to be creative. Our designs should empower people to be creative. Julia, what do you think?
I mean, that's the long and short of it. Thank you, Sam. And thank you to WDO. It's been congratulations on hitting 65 years. I think that's a massive feat. And we are glad that as representatives of the Pan-African Design Institute, we could participate and share our views on creative leadership and how that is stemmed in creative confidence. And we inherently do that as designers on the continent. We are striving to change policy. We're striving to adjust policy where we can. And we welcome anyone who wants to join our cause, who's more interested in Paddy, who's interested in Sam and myself, and taking these conversations further beyond Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much.